Hey there, ADHD bosses. Sex, it can be fun, but you add ADHD to the mix and it gets a little bit more challenging. In today's webinar, we're going to discuss the impacts of ADHD on your sex life. Hi, I'm Tom Hudock, co-founder of Boss of Your Brain, along with Dr. Claire Sira. We brought in our friend Dr. Lyne, a psychologist who focuses on ADHD and sex, to discuss with us around this topic. She sent me this introduction. The two ADHD and sex webinars dive into the inner workings of your sexuality using an ADHD lens, and will provide you with tools to connect your mind and body. The goal of these webinars is to create an intimate, authentic sexual bond with yourself and your partner. So this webinar that you're watching will be about solo sex. We have another webinar that will be about partnered sex. So without any further ado, let's bring on Dr. Lyne, Dr. Claire, and myself, and let's have this discussion on sex. We're going to explore a little bit about ADHD and sex, obviously, about this. But what we'll go through is a bit of a presentation that she'll go through. We'll do a little bit of Q&A at the end. And in that way, what we'll do is, if people are commenting things in the chat, that's great. We have Grace here and myself, and we'll kind of monitor that. And so if there's questions that come up, or if people are liking someone's question, we'll make sure that it gets asked to Dr. Lyne. And then, we'll do the Q&A at the end. We'll wrap up at about 1 o'clock. And then what happens is the group that is in our hub, the ADHD hub, is our online community for adults with ADHD. And there comes another one. We're going to jump over to that area over there, and we're just going to do another session with Dr. Lyne in a more intimate sort of way. And so, so when we get to the end, you'll understand why we'll end at 1. We're going to move over to another platform and continue on there for those that are in that group. All right.
When we're talking about sex and you're talking about that it's going to be more intimate, we'll just clarify that you'll just have a little bit more space for questions.
Yes, it's not one of those kind of programs. You're right. Yeah, good call. Yeah, awesome. Well, maybe on that, so now that we've kind of
breaking the ice?
Yeah, broke the ice there a little bit around this subject, because I know sometimes it's hard to talk about this subject for people. But yeah, maybe we'll just get started. So Dr. Lyne, so registered psychologist here in BC, and you've been providing psychological services for like 25 years now or something like that, and doing assessments and treatment and all that. And it sounds like your focus right now is a little bit more focused in ADHD and sex. And I know you've got a lot of background in that. So maybe I'll just hand it over to you now.
Thank you so much, Tom. Yes, this business about neurodiversity, I have been lucky to just have so much fun in the work that I do and really enjoy working with people and meeting people. And over the years, we've talked about neurodiversity here and there, but really since COVID, it has been a main feature and a main kind of conversation socially on social media, and people are talking more about ADHD. And so I've really been enjoying getting to know ADHD communities, talking more with people, and then bringing what I do, which is, of course, this focus on sexual therapy, sexual health, relationships, and bringing that to this field of neurodiversity. And that's kind of how this started with me going, I wonder what's out there when it comes to ADHD and sex, and what are people struggling with? And these are some of the things that, I keep hearing, and can we talk more about that? And I was really hoping that today and next week would be these great opportunities to start the conversation, because we really don't have a ton of information and a ton of research. It really is an emerging field. So that's part of why I'm here, and hoping that you're all here and you've got questions, and really looking forward to talking a lot with all of you today about what some of your thoughts are as this comes up. I think I'm going to throw the slides up. It might make things a little easier. Anything before we get started that you might have a question about? Oh, I think I'm pinned. Okay. And I'm not techie. You're all forewarned. So if this is looking weird or if it's not working, then let me know.
Yeah, no, you're looking good. And if
Okay.
people have any comments or questions, for sure use the chat. And if there's a chance for us to maybe bring somebody on who wants to talk about that. We can do that as well a little bit later. All right.
Sounds great. Okay. So, ADHD and sex, we're talking today about solo sex. And I really am making this distinction because I think it's important when we talk about, well, really when we're talking about all sex, but particularly if we're looking at neurodivergence, there's this business between, what happens when you're engaging sexually and trying to find pleasure on your own versus what happens when you are doing that with a partner. And the challenges of both can be a little different. So maybe before we get started, what are your hopes, dreams, questions? What are some of the things that you were kind of logging in here today going, man, I really hope she talks about this thing. Um, Throw it up there. Let me just see. I don't know that I can see the chat on this business. Maybe what are some of the themes, Grace, that you see are coming up?
I haven't seen any
No?
comments in the chat, but I'll give people a
Okay,
second to
nobody
type.
dares. It's okay if it's too early. It's just the first few minutes.
I was also going to mention if it's a sensitive topic and you're not comfortable putting it straight in the chat, you can private message Tom or myself, and we can read it out loud anonymously that way.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Okay. It's okay if you don't have anything.
We've got a couple in the chat. So distractibility during sex, and I'd like to know how ADHD affects my sex life with my partner.
Okay. Sounds good. Okay. So when we're talking about sex, the first thing to clarify, if I can get this working, there we go. When I talk about sex, actually what I'm talking about is play. And it's a really important distinction because when we think of sex, for the most part, people think about intercourse, right? So if we're talking about sex, it's like, either penis and vagina or penis and anus, and it's very specific, mouth to genital specific stuff. And really, when we're thinking about sex, I would like you to consider that it's a much broader definition. And the wider a definition that you can have, the more sex is going to be fun, right? So if you think of this as play, either play that you're having on your own, which is what we're focused on today, or play that you're having with your partner. If we think about pleasure and this business of what feels good, and that is going to be different from one person to the other. I know this might be surprising, but sex is supposed to be fun. So this is about having fun and having an enjoyable time, either on your own or with somebody. And so if sex isn't fun, then that's the first thing to start thinking about is what's going on that's not making it fun. And often when you think about neurodivergence, there's kind of specific themes that keep coming up. And that's part of why we wanted to have this conversation. So when you think about play, when you think about fun, when you think about the ways that you are enjoying time with your partner, some things can kind of creep in that can get in the way of that. Right? So if we talk about just generally, scheduling can be an issue for people or the quality of your relationship. Um, and if we're thinking about sex on your own versus sex with a partner, some of the things that make it fun might be a little different, right? It might be a different sort of fun if I'm on my own versus a different sort of fun if I'm with somebody. To play, you actually have to be present. So when you think about any sort of play where you are really enjoying yourself, one of the things that generally is happening is you're not thinking about the past, you're not thinking about what you're going to do 5 minutes from now, you're really kind of enjoying a sensation or a pleasure that you're having right now. I don't know what your favorite food is, but if I think about one of those chocolate fountains and it's like dripping and I've got a strawberry in my hand and I want to dip it in the fountain, there's a lot of fun that's happening as I'm picking up the strawberry and smelling it and putting it under that chocolate and then, maybe licking some of it off and then tasting it and having that first bite and taking my time. That would be very different than if I just grabbed the strawberry, stuffed it in the fountain, put it in my mouth, kept talking, and moved on to whatever else I was doing next, right? And so this is kind of that first distinction when you're thinking about sex that I'd like you to just consider. We're talking about play and all the ways that you play. Our focus today is solo sex. I really love this picture. She just seems really happy. And we're going to be talking about partner play next time. Um, so when you think about ADHD and sex, this really is an emerging field, right? We're really starting to talk. I mean, let's face it, we're really only starting to properly talk about ADHD in women, ADHD in overall, inattentive as an important part of the ADHD presentations. Um, we're much better now in talking about some of these themes. And so you can imagine taking ADHD and putting it together with sexuality is not something that we've done a lot of discussion about. So when you think about some of the themes that come up fairly frequently, you've got this business of, well, I'm hyper focused on a bunch of projects, right? Whatever that is. So, I've decided I'm an artist and I'm hyper focused on this painting and I need to like focus on the painting 24/7 for the next 30 days. There's no time for sex, right? Or this business of being distracted during sex. I kind of start, I'm there, and then I'm gone. I'm thinking about the grocery list. I'm thinking about these other things, and I'm not actually in my body, right? Putting all your energy into other projects so that by the end of the day or when you have a sexual partner available, you're too tired. And this business about courtship hyperfocus, which, so I know you guys are this really great ADHD community, and I'm I'm assuming that you have talked and understand this idea of ADHD, we hyper focus on a bunch of stuff, including relationships. So when you first meet somebody, it's like, wow, right? It's like amazing. And there's all this dopamine. It's so much fun and they're all amazing. And then after a while, maybe I get cooled off a little bit and I go looking for the next fun thing. And so that can impact my sexual relationship if we're talking with a partner. I can't sit in my body long enough to figure out how I feel, right? If we come back to the chocolate fountain and the strawberry idea, I need to be able to kind of be connected long enough to realize that I'm really enjoying eating this strawberry. And so if I'm not connected in that way, that can be a problem to getting to that sexual pleasure. We're going to talk about sexual problems as well. And one of the things with ADHD is that as a group, we tend to have more sexual problems, more sexual, I'm going to highlight this dysfunction around, well, maybe my erections aren't working, or maybe I'm having a hard time reaching orgasm. So some of these things can be more of a problem. And sometimes solo sex can feel easier than partnered sex. Can you think about why that might be? Like, why would solo sex be easier, I'm going to air quote easier, if you have ADHD or you're neurodivergent? What are kind of the first things that pop up?
Not seeing answers in the
No,
chat
it's just
yet.
quiet.
We've got a few new questions though, but
I have
I could
thrown a
say
lot of
something,
information at you already.
Dr. Lynn, I could say something about
Yes,
that. Just
please,
like,
Dr. Claire. Yes, go for
what
it.
could get in, ask your question again, because of course I
Yeah.
forgot it.
So, so what would make solo sex easier than partner?
Yeah, it to me, and I don't know about the people on the call, and I'm not sure if everyone on the call has ADHD or not. I don't want to make assumptions, but I know in the boss community in the hub, we have certainly talked about how it can be hard to pay. There's a lot to pay attention to, and it can be hard to pay attention to our own experience and be considering the other person's needs and their pleasure and wanting to, we want them to have a good time too. So I think it's just a lot to pay attention to.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. That switch can be really hard, right? And it's one of the reasons that I think it's important to break it up when we're talking about it, because the challenges are slightly different when you're on your own versus when you're with somebody, right? Absolutely. I see a hand up. Allison, do I understand that properly?
Yeah, so I'm just one of the things I don't see on the list, I'm sure it's implied here, is in terms of distraction, is masking. So as a woman, having to fit into the societal pressures of just masking in general, but also having ADHD and learning to mask during sex. I just, yeah, I would love to hear more about this, and the fact that solo sex is easier than partnered sex. I guess that was the point that I was kind of hitting on there. Is solo sex is way easier to get into, my own body, as opposed to body with another person around, because there's much less masking.
Love it. That is a fabulous point, and you're right. It absolutely should be on my list, right? And we'll get into this business around intensity, but if you're masking, you're right. How are you sitting in your body? How are you actually feeling and experiencing pleasure? Because you are going to be even more distracted. But well, what am I supposed to be doing? How should I be presenting? What is the expectation in this particular um, event or environment? That's a really great point, Allison. When you think about sex and play and enjoyability, when you're masking, it's really hard. You can't even get there, right? How do you play and how do you enjoy yourself when you're trying to be somebody different, or you're trying to do what's expected, right? So this list isn't inclusive, but these are the things that I identify as common ADHD and sex problems, right? So this first business around anxiety and being very anxious sexually, problems with attention, and Dr. Claire is talking about that already, about, being able to pay attention to all the things that are happening when you're having sex. The transition problems, right? I'm doing one thing and now I have to move into doing this other thing, which involves being naked, and involves cold, and it involves or hot, or, all of this business of transitioning into sex and transitioning out of sex. And we'll talk a bit more today, but when I think about solo sex, I think there's more problems around transition that happens for people versus some of the other pieces. Intimacy problems, this business of getting close to people, and the fear that that might have, or maybe some negative experiences you've had in the past. Sensation problems, right? So when you think about sensation and you think about smells, tastes, textures, how things feel on your skin, there's more sensation problems in the neurodivergent community that you have to deal with that you wouldn't necessarily be experiencing or having an issue with necessarily as a neurotypical person. This problem about hyperfocus that I was talking about a little earlier, and then this business of there's more likelihood that there would be problems with reaching orgasm, or ejaculating too fast, or not ejaculating, having erectile problems, those sort of things, as well as kind of sexual desire problems. Dr. Claire, are there anything in this list that that you would add, or that you have thoughts about when you...
I was nodding my head. I mean, especially about the transitions. That is I'm really glad you brought that up. That is an issue. I mean, I experienced that. It's just like, the shifting can be hard. But also when you were talking about sensation, and, it may, for lots of people with ADHD, it might not go as far as being considered a sexual dysfunction, but I think there can be hypersensitivities, to fabrics or to tags. Like, I have all the tags cut out of my clothes, and so I think it could be almost painful until you kind of can settle into your body. Yeah, so I really appreciate this list.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And I have something else to add, Dr. Lynn, and someone else actually asked me privately the question as well, just hyper focusing on sex.
Yes,
Just like you
absolutely.
said, hyper focusing on a relationship, but I'm sure there's like this focus on sex and, what can I do, what I want, my fantasies, all that.
Yes, absolutely. And hyper focusing on sex, of course, is obviously kind of talked about in these ways around, addiction, and I just am too much into sex. But when you see it from this ADHD lens, it starts making, I think, more sense. Of it becomes a hyper focus like some of the other ones. But sex feels really good. And so as soon as you have this business of orgasm being paired with whatever it is you're doing, you're going to tend to want to do more of that. And so, absolutely, we are going to be talking more about that. And thanks for bringing it up. Yeah, it's a big point. So, solo sex, what in the world am I talking about? Why do we have to call it solo sex? You know, I wrestled with this because really we're talking about masturbation, right? But if you take a little bit of a wider lens and you think about, well, sometimes you're thinking about sex or you're thinking about pleasure, you're not necessarily masturbating or you're not masturbating to orgasm. Maybe you're reading erotica or you're watching porn. And because it's this business of, for the most part now, I mean, I'm old, but for some of you, sex and masturbation has always involved a computer, right? So this thing that I'm talking on is kind of connected to sexuality in the way that it just wasn't 20 years ago. And we're trying to catch up and look at, well, what does it mean if sex is you and your computer? Right? Because now it's not just you. And so part of why I think that we need this label of solo sex is we're talking a little bit bigger than masturbation, but essentially that's what we're talking about, right? So if you're like, oh my goodness, what is this woman yabbering about? Really, we're talking about masturbation. Okay. Okay. So what would be the advantages of solo sex? We've started talking about it a little bit. In regards to, Dr. Claire is talking about like actually being in the moment and focusing on yourself, having less distractions. What are some of the other advantages? I swear this isn't a test.
Well, I mean, I'll just kind of start a little bit as people are maybe providing their comments. Is that you get what you want at that time,
Yes.
right? So if you feel like something, you're like, well, I know I can get that, and you
Yeah.
don't have to ask for it.
Yeah.
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 We've
You
got-
get it.
Oh, sorry, we've got similar comments saying knowing your and exploring your own likes and dislikes, and that it doesn't need to go longer than you want it to. Once you're done with things, you can move on.
Yes. Yeah. The time, right? So we have this combination of I don't actually have to say to anybody what I want, which is kind of nice. And I don't have to be in it longer than I want to, right? So if I want like a minute and a half quickie, I can do that. If I want to be in there 3 hours, I can do that. I get to decide the length of time. Can you think of any other advantages?
I think you can escape yourself from any embarrassment of saying what you like.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you also don't need any kind of agreement, right? So if you like something and you can kind of say, okay, well, this is what I like, and I don't really have to negotiate that. I don't have to get agreement. I can just go ahead with whatever it is I like. One of the things when we look at some of the research about ADHD in sex is that we tend to have a wider sexual interests. So there's more kind of exploration, there's more interest in different things, and there may be some shame connected to that exploration and that interest um, for some people. And so then we kind of get around all of that, right? Yeah. Okay. I think the only other thing I would add in regards to advantages is this business of you don't really have to think about sensation, right? As Dr. Claire was talking about earlier. So, if there's a particular, whatever, sensation, smell, taste that you don't like, you don't have to bring it into the mix. And you also don't really have to worry about hygiene. And I know that seems, pretty basic, but it doesn't matter if you've had a shower today or a week ago or whatever. If you're on your own, you're on your own. Your computer's not really going to care, right? Whereas a partner might. So when we think about some of the disadvantages, how are the ways that it can become a problem? So we've already, we have this business of it can get too much. I can get hyper focused on sex, think about it too much, be in it too much. And that's definitely one of the pieces that we can see in the neurodivergent community is that solo sex becomes too big in your life. Absolutely. What are some of the other disadvantages?
Would hyperfocus, I just noticed someone actually asked this comment as well, but would hyperfocus also take it too far in some instances, watching too much porn, doing too often, missing work,
Absolutely. And taking it too far in regards to content as well, right? So this business of intensity. One of the things with ADHD is we tend to like things that are pretty intense, and we're always looking to kind of up that level, right? How can I make this more interesting? And so if you're on your own, you can kind of go into spaces that either are not able to be reproduced by a partner or real life. You can also go into illegal spaces where you're doing and thinking about things that aren't helpful or are illegal or harmful to others. So there's no catch net there. Yeah. Any other disadvantages?
We've got in the chat repetitive behavior to come back to solo too often for myself.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So it becomes this repetitive behavior where essentially, you can start excluding a partner or the possibility of a partner because you're kind of in that zone, right? And it's this interesting chicken or the egg around if you're spending too much time masturbating online or masturbating on your own, you tend to have less social connections. And if you start saying no to invitations because you'd rather be masturbating, then you can see how that wheel just kind of keeps turning, right? People stop asking you to do things, or you do less things, you have more time, and then you kind of get stuck in that repetition. Yeah. The other thing I would add is it can get lonely. So if this is mainly what you're doing, it can feel lonely. It also can get you to that place where learning to negotiate what you want, saying what you want, thinking about what a partner might want, some of this stuff then stops happening. And because in part because you're not used to it happening so much anymore. So there's some of the ways that it can get you kind of off maybe the ideal life that you want for yourself.
So
Um,
Lynn, it sounds like you're kind of touching on sort of the social skills or the relationship skills that go along with you being involved with somebody else or other people. And if you're more focused on just yourself, you kind of lose out on maybe reinforcing or building those habits and those skills of like interacting and talking to people and maybe, doing the flirting and, all those things that kind of lead up. But that would be, I would consider those the fun part of sex, even though sex is kind of maybe the end result. It's all the things that lead up to it as well.
yeah, that's a really good point, right? So when we think about like enthusiastic consent is really the goal for consent now, right? So it's not just a question of, well, somebody gave me the sign or there was some nonverbal cues. It really is like, does this person look like they really want to have sex with me? Hooray. And so getting used to that, getting used to asking for consent, getting used to talking about some of these things, there really is a practice part to this, right? And so if you're never practicing that skill, it's not going to start feeling easier, even if you happen to get older or over time. And I would argue they're pretty important skills to have. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what kind of our belief as well is just more. I know sometimes it might feel easier to do, not learn some of these skills, and we talk more about getting things done or relationship skills. But yeah, I understand that learning skills can be harder sometimes, but I think it's worth it. And once you learn it, no one can take that away from you, right? I think so. Um, yeah. Anyway,
Yeah. No,
skills.
that's
Yeah.
a really great point. Yeah, absolutely. Any
I
other
was,
thoughts?
oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I was thinking also like practicing being vulnerable with another person, not just sexually, but like in a whole lifestyle kind of way. Like it's a good place to practice being vulnerable, but especially with ADHD, if you have really kind of different interests that you might feel ashamed of because you're like exploring all these different avenues. You don't really get the opportunity to see if other people are interested in that, and you might kind of end up in a place of shame and never really share that with somebody.
That's a great point. Absolutely. And it does circle us back to this business of masking, right? Um, you don't have to mask when you're all alone, but you also then don't get out of that habit of masking sexually with a partner. Yeah, yeah. And I think coming back to this idea is really important of the sexual interests and the shame that you can have if you happen to have a sexual interest that's a little different. And this idea that because there's this variation in, oh, well, today this is interesting, right? And then, well, tomorrow I might be interested in something else. And in a year, it might be something else. And there's this movement often in regards to interest, all interests. I would argue probably occurs as well for ADHD and sex and sexual interests. So typically, you're going to be talking about things that are way broader, right? There's going to be more stuff in the mix. Well, I'm interested in, sorry? Oh, no? Okay. I'm interested in this. I'm,
Hiya, sorry, have I clicked on the wrong thing? Hello?
I'm not,
Hi, oh,
I think there's some muting. I don't
Yeah,
know.
let's continue on, Lynn.
Okay.
And
Okay.
Steph, if that was you, you could put your question in the chat. That might be easier. We're just having we couldn't hear you. So yeah.
Thanks, Tom. So just this idea of like the variety of sexual interests and the fact that that variety can change when it comes to gender, when it comes to activity, when it comes to interest in particular things. We tend to have this very static view, right? I'm, heterosexual and I like ABC. And realistically, often it's not that simple, right? And depending on the situation and depending on the partner, it may be quite varied. And so having those conversations and the intimacy that's involved in sharing and being vulnerable, Grace, you make a really good point of that it doesn't allow that process to happen and to realize that, a lot of other people have similar thoughts or concerns or interests or beliefs. And just because you have an interest today doesn't mean you have to have it in 3 months, and it can vary. There's some examples here. I think we've talked about quite a few of them already around what some of the concerns could be. So I'll just leave them there. I think the only one I would highlight really is this business of body image. And we haven't talked about that yet, but this idea that if you happen to be hyper focused on a particular part of your body or you have concerns about your body, that also can get in the way and lead you down the road of more solo sex. So I think we've talked about this a little bit, and I'd like to just get into maybe the meat of what we're talking about today. But the first one, which is, really obvious, sex requires attention. We don't talk about that very much, do we? How you actually need to be in your body, not just in your body, but having the attention for sex. So for some people, it makes it easier to schedule it so that it's kind of in the calendar. For other people, it's like, well, if I think that it's just going to show up, then I'm probably not going to have the sex life that I'm looking for. And so having your sexual self a part of your life is an important piece. Coming into sex, that transition piece, and coming out of sex is also a really important piece, right? So if I ask you, where does your attention tend to go during sex? What happens for you if you're not hyper focused, but if you're having this experience of your attention drifting, where does it tend to drift to? These are hard questions, right?
These are hard questions because I think it takes a little bit of thought to bring yourself back to maybe the last couple of moments when you were having sex and then what you were getting distracted about. And someone did ask a question about this, which would probably be the next piece to this is, he was saying that he does get distracted during sex. And so, what can I do to not be distracted with
Yes.
sex? But I'm sure you'll get into that
We're going
next.
to talk about that. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Okay. So distractions are a thing, we've got this, right? Interoceptive awareness is this connection between mind body. And we know with ADHD that that connection, it tends to be weak. Again, it's not for everybody, but for many people, that connection between mind and body is difficult. And it is essential for sex, right? For you to experience sexual pleasure, get into the moment, be there, you also need to connect that feeling with what's going on in your body and your mind and bring that together, right? So if I ask you to take a minute, and this is one of my favorite ones, just take a minute and clench your anus if you're comfortable doing so, right? You just clench it and relax and breathe. And can you see how that just taking that 2 seconds to connect with your body, for some of you, that might actually be a really hard exercise to do. And if that is difficult, that connection, um, how can you start working on that to be also be able to bring that into the sexual realm? Right? You'll hear a lot in ADHD communities, this business about the importance of mindfulness. This is really kind of what we're talking about, and saying that, it applies sexually too. Okay. I'm just mindful of the time, but when you think about this mind-body connection, makes sense that it's easier when you're alone? Are there people who kind of think, actually, it's easier when I'm with my partner to kind of be grounded?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm interested to see what people comment on that. So yeah, so basically you're saying, like, if you're with a partner, is it easier to be grounded because they're physically there with you versus, some people who might be more physically grounding when they're on their own as distractions. This will
Yes.
be interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Because I know with my partner, it's it helps me, just if there are distractions or there are things going on in my head, it helps me that there's somebody there with me. So yeah, I'll be interested to see what other people suggest on this.
So if we circle back to the question of, okay, well, what the heck do you do about the distractedness? In a way, part of that answer is, which group are you in? Right? So if you're with the person, or if you're the kind of person that gets distracted more with a partner than with on your own, the solution or some of the hacks might be different than if it's the other way around. Right? So if you try this exercise, just kind of pet your hand, right? And just tell me what you notice. Well, you don't actually have to tell me what you notice, but make note of what you notice when you're petting your hand, right? Now, slap your hand. Which one feels better? Which one is more grounding?
That's interesting because, well, for me, the petting feels better, but the slap got my attention and it grounded me more.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And so these are some of the ways that you can start exploring sensation to sort out, what sensation do you need? When we think about sex, we often have the script of the way it's supposed to be. And often, if you're having problems with focus or attention, you actually need something that's maybe not in the script, right? So if you happen to have a partner that pinches you or slaps your butt or whatever, it's probably going to bring you back in much quicker than not, unless you happen to be somebody where this actually brings you back in and is more grounding. So the fun, this is what I love about talking about sex, is that the funnest part is that you really get to start exploring what grounds you and what is fun for you and what you need, and opening up this window of, well, everybody does sex X way, whatever that is, and that's the way to do it. When you're neurodivergent, it's like, I'm sure you've heard this a million times, you need to start creating what actually works for you, right? And if this is going to ground you and bring your attention back, then great. You know, are you able to then communicate that to your partner? Fun? Okay.
We've got a question asking if you could explain more about grounding in the context of being with a partner.
That's a great question. So when I want to be thoughtful about when grounding with a partner, I think we'll get to next week. But more specifically, grounding is being able to create this mind-body connection. That's really what we're doing, right? So you're trying to find ways to be in your body rather than out of your body. And for some people, if you have a partner that's very good at pushing you into your body, it works well. For other people, if you're having sex on your own, for example, and you're just mindlessly clicking or mindlessly looking at something or mindlessly masturbating, you can see how that creates this problem because you're no longer connected to your body. And so if we think specifically of solo sex and you actually taking the time to stop, breathe, focus on your body, feel your feet pushing into the ground, and noticing how your body is feeling in the moment, right? Really, we're talking about slowing things down so that you can figure out, is it enough, right? Have I been doing this for like an hour and I need to go do something else now? Or am I trying to create an orgasm and I haven't even kind of connected to my body enough and I want to just pop one out in 30 seconds and go off with my day, but I don't have that connection happening at all to get things going. Does that make some sense? Not sure if that clarifies your question or not.
Yeah, I think that was great. I like what you said about the not following the script too, because I think there is a lot of pressure for it to go a certain way. And the more you're thinking about that during the moment, you know, the more distracted you might be. So
Absolutely. Yeah. 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 So grounding and creating less distraction is about connecting to your body. And if you're struggling with your body for whatever reason, right? I don't think it's the way it's supposed to look, or I'm worried about this, that, or the other, it makes it even harder to come into that space, right? That you're holding. Yeah. So both partnered and solo sex involve sensations. And we talked a little bit about this. But this business of smell, touch, feel, um, texture, and are there particular sensitivities that get in your way during sex, maybe that create distractions that you're not noticing, right? The window is opened and the breeze on your skin is uncomfortable or distracting, or that sensation of sweat. You know, if you happen to be like, oh, I can really feel it the minute I start sweating, and then all of a sudden you're thinking about that rather than being in your body. We've talked in a little bit already about hygiene, and then sensations specific to condom use, which can also get in people's way if that sensation of having a condom on is either uncomfortable or distracting, or it creates a smell that you don't like. Can you start identifying those and then finding ways around them, whether you're solo sex or partnered sex? And how would you want to talk about that? Can you talk about that? Right? Guess we're getting into masking now.
I really like that, Lynn, because we go when our groups, we also a fair bit of it is a little bit of self-reflection. And so, and I think that's kind of what you're saying is, so when someone's in the moment, maybe not in the moment, but maybe after, or thinking about previous encounters, yeah, you're trying to find like, where am I spending my time being distracted, or what are the things that distract me, and maybe taking note of them. And we also know that the environment for people with ADHD, the environment's really important. And so I'm assuming it's even more important when it's involving sex, and maybe even more important with a partner.
Absolutely. right? One of the examples that often comes up is this business of, well, the sheets are wet, right? So, you're having a good time, you could still keep going, but now the sheets are wet and you kind of feel the sheet, and now what about the laundry? And off you go. Um, and kind of identifying that and going, they sell those great sex blankets on Amazon. They're like $50, right? You get yourself a sex blanket, it's nice and soft, it's the sensation you want, you don't feel the wetness. And now we've resolved that problem, right? Rather than just trying to grit your teeth through it and go, okay, well, over time, I will feel more comfortable with sensation X, going, nah, we can work around this, right? And how do we do that? Okay. I just wanted to have a quick note as well. One of the things that can encourage solo sex is if you have had a history of trauma. And if that is the case for you, if solo sex feels safer, then, really just wanting to make a note of seek that additional assistance. That's a bigger issue. But I did want to make sure that we've talked about it at least, that if that's the case for you, when you start doing this self-reflection, you can come back and go, okay, maybe there's something there I need to resolve that's more than just a workaround, but actually is specific to something that's happened in my past or in the present. So, I think we've talked a lot about this already. Solo sex is an issue. If it excludes a partner, it's taking up way too much time, it's too intense, reduces your skills, leads you to believe that there's nobody out there that would be okay with your sexual preferences, reduces your hygiene, and leads you into kind of harmful sexual fantasies. So what do we do about it? The first thing that is really important is to manage your ADHD symptoms. And it may feel a little counterintuitive that managing symptoms would make your sex life better. In the few studies that we have, it really seems to be the key. Because as you can imagine, a lot of these things around distraction and attention, if you are more focused, then all of a sudden, some of these things are just not as big of an issue anymore. So that is one of the pieces. On top of it all, if we're putting our partnered sex lens, our partnered, sex, or partner relationship lens on, you tend to have better relationships as well. Creating more time with friends and family is another important thing. You know how I was talking earlier about how it's this chicken or the egg of I'm spending more and more time on my computer, I'm spending more and more time masturbating, I'm not getting out as much. And so if you can reverse that wheel by getting involved in your community and going out and booking time with friends, or maybe doing some volunteer work, something that gets you out of the house and interacting with others, is another really nice way to do that. Tom, how do you guys talk about all the screen time stuff? So I'm sure it comes up in your program. What are some of the ways that you limit screen time, or you encourage people to limit screen time?
Well, I think Claire has her own versions of this as well, but I think for us, like normally what I do when we start our group sessions, I always ask people where their cell phone is.
Okay.
And so I'm always asking them when we have a scheduled chat, we have our group meetings, that they put it away, not just face down, but I show them, I put it into the drawer and things like that. So again, back to environment, right? And so how do we make the environment like less or more sticky for those things that can really distract us and take us away? And so if it's to do with screen time, how do we not make it so easily available, and make it just a little bit more sticky, so it's not as easy as just like TV in every room, just plunk down, start watching, and it goes right to YouTube or whatever.
Absolutely. Dr. Claire, would you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, Tom's talking about making things more sticky. I mean, the phrase I always use is we want to increase friction. If there's a habit that we are doing that is not in line with our bigger picture goals, when our best selves and we know what we want, we make these goals, and then we have this habit that keeps interfering with that. I try to make it just more steps, little bit less convenient, increase the friction that gives me more opportunity to notice what I'm doing so that I don't do it so automatically. Because I think people with ADHD, we have a lot of things that happen automatically and we're not even aware of them. And so, I mean, obviously everybody has, these routines, but I feel like just for survival, our brains do it more. I wanted to comment on Peter's question earlier about using solo sex as an avoidance strategy for anxiety. To me, and you're the expert, Lynn, so I do want to hear your thoughts on that. But when I read that question, I thought it's like any other addiction that is being used to avoid a stress, like it's solving a problem of anxiety without solving the actual anxiety source. And so it's an avoidance technique, but it's no different in my mind to any other avoidance technique. Is that, do you feel differently about that, or is that?
I think the only difference I would say is that because it's really powerful, so orgasm is like the biggest reinforcer we have,
Yeah.
right? I've got Candy Crush on my phone. I like Candy Crush, but if you're considering Candy Crush and you're comparing it to an orgasm, you're getting way more bang for your buck. And so
That's a good point. And it's funny because I was thinking that when you were talking about prioritizing seeing friends and maybe doing something volunteering and getting yourself out of the house and out of an environment where it would be really easy to, masturbate, I would think that for the first while, because of that difference in valence, that one is not going to be nearly as rewarding as the other, we would have to fake it till we make it. We'd have to keep going with the going out of the house and the social activities, knowing that over weeks and maybe months, our brain would settle and would actually be able to notice the rewards associated with those tasks in a way it might not at first. They just might not be salient enough.
Yeah, it would certainly have to be a fun thing. So if it's a question of, well, let's go sit with a bunch of neurotypicals at the coffee shop,
yes,
nothing, I don't think that's going to work, right? But maybe it's I'm going to go join my local running group, or I'm going to go
kickboxing,
skydiving, or kickboxing, or yes, right? So the other thing when we think about limiting the screen time is actually putting Net Nanny or something of the sort on your devices, which will block all the sexual content and the violent content for some of them. The nice thing about that is it's kind of specific software that really does get in your way, and it's specific to sexual stuff. And so if you can add that to your phone, you are creating that wall that then will allow you to think more about, oh, what's actually going on, right? If I'm anxious, like what are some of the things I'm anxious about, or what am I avoiding, or all of those things. Best sleep I ever had was when I started shutting off my Wi-Fi at midnight, right? So like it or not, doesn't matter what you're doing. If you're in the middle of a paper going, but this is really interesting, and bam, right? Like your computer's down. And so creating some of those limits can be really, really helpful for this, particularly with solo sex problems, because then you are addressing it in a way that it stops you in your tracks, right? You're not having to kind of work with screen power. Exercise obviously is a really kind of nice way to manage this as well. It's good for all of the ADHD stuff anyway. Using screens in public. So it becomes much harder to mask, please. I should be careful. Please don't just start using your screens in public to masturbate, okay? Like, we're not talking about this. But if you have your computer, you use your laptop or your phone in places that are kind of more general throughout the day, and you get used to that, then it becomes harder. It's not like you're doing all your computer use behind closed doors, which can also kind of make this more of a problem. And addressing that anxiety, addressing the sexual problems with a mental health professional is really important. So if you just kind of stop the solo sex, or you reduce it, but you don't actually do the other work around what kind of is getting you stuck there in the first place, that can be, it just might be harder. So it's an important thing to add. Can you think of any other things that you would want to do to address any solo sexual concerns that you have, or anything maybe that you have used that has been really helpful? What's worked? Grace is like, it's very quiet. I can't.
It is.
Oh, it's okay.
The silence is loud. I'm not seeing any chats yet, but people might be typing, so we'll wait. Oh, we've got a hand up.
Yes, Allison.
Well, besides the usual diet, exercise, and all that fun stuff, I really liked your point about grounding
Mm.
and getting in touch with your body. Um, it really brings me into the moment to do that. So I really appreciate that. I loved yoga for that. That the only moment you need to be in is right now. I think was one of the taglines. So yeah, thanks for that. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Allison. And it's a great actually way, and I'm glad that you brought it back up to kind of look at it would be an easy way to address a lot of these concerns if you are finding that you're using too much solo sex or you're getting too involved sexually, and you can kind of do that grounding and see where you're actually at. And you probably will notice some of those other things happening, the anxiety or I'm feeling lonely or whatever. But if we flip it around and we say, okay, well, I'm busy with all these other things, and that's what's going on for me, and I'm not thinking about sex, the grounding also can be really helpful for your body to you reconnect to your body and go, oh, you know what? It turns out I do have some sex drive here, right? I haven't really been kind of experiencing it or focused on it, but it's there and it allows you to get there as well. So I'm mindful for the time. These are some self-reflection questions that I'd encourage you to think about if you'd like. Like, how are you going to make solo sex play? How do you want to connect with your body? How do you engage your mind? How do you want to deal with this mind-body connection business? This transitioning in and out of sex, and what would you like that to look like for yourself? How are you going to create balance between solo sex and partnered sex? um, and and really just encouraging you to start thinking about how some of these things impact you. Um, and if you have any specific thoughts or questions or ideas, I would love to hear from you.
These are great questions, Lynn, just to be able to ask yourself, and just to maybe let everybody know on the call that we will be um, recording that. We have been recording this, but we're also going to provide everybody who's on here a link so they can see the recording and maybe also see the questions again at the end. Or if you want to take a screenshot now, that's also a good idea as well. Yeah, I don't know. This has been really good. The conversations and the chat has been really interesting, and to see everybody sort of asking some of these questions and a topic that can be sometimes difficult to share and share your thoughts. And so I appreciate everybody who's commented and jumped on here, because we're a lot of us are strangers on this call, and so I really appreciate that. Feel like this was a safe enough space to kind of talk about that. I also want to say that it's 1 o'clock, a little bit after 1, so I know we have another group that's in the ADHD hub that I want to make sure I'm conscious of the time there as well. And so Lynn, maybe you could unshare your screen, or
Absolutely. Yes.
yeah,
There we go.
awesome.
There we go. That's better.
I'll remove that spotlight there. Awesome. And then, so everybody knows, like, I really appreciate everybody coming on. Dr. Claire and I, we run groups around ADHD. This is kind of why we want to have these webinars with various different people on various different topics. And so I'm really glad that everybody was able to join us for this one. Just a small little plug for us. So we're Boss of Your Brain. And so we do have things like, we have a book that helps people with, with getting things done. And this book is actually also a full-blown course that we do a group coaching course with. So we do a lot more than just sort of the webinars. I just wanted to let everybody know that there's other resources out there. I'll probably end up sending you an email just to let you know where the links are and all those kind of things. Lynn, was there anything at the end? I know you are doing other things and other, writing all kinds of stuff and all that, but is there any sort of little bit that you want to share at the end here?
Well, just thank you so much for being here. I do have, I'm just thinking, so I have written a book and it's out there, but it's more specific to problematic sexual behavior, problematic solo sex in regards to content and interests. But I'm really happy to continue this conversation. And I feel like this is something that we're just starting to talk about. And so the more that, if you have thoughts or comments or you want to email me, I don't know if we can, if you can maybe attach my website to the email going out. I'd love to hear from you and some thoughts you've had, things that have worked, things that haven't worked so well, just so that we can keep the conversation going. And I think that's how we get to new things and new ideas and new hacks that really work well for people, is that we keep talking. And I would love to talk with all of you about this some more.
That sounds great, Lynn. So for everybody, once you get an email from me, if you reply, and you want to provide some insight or advice or anything like that that I can forward on to Lynn, I would be happy to do that. And then next week, and so we have same time, same place, same bat channel. I'll send out another link for next week as well, just so that everybody has it. And next week is about partnered sex, which is going to be different than what we talked about today. So yeah, stay tuned for that one as well.
Sounds wonderful. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. And for those who are bosses, from Boss of Your Brain, we'll see you on the Inside the Hub.